We're here today at the Eden Shale Farm in Owington, Kentucky, actually showing producers how we do some winter feeding here. We're actually right here, we're at the site of the large feeder. This large feeder is designed for a 32 roll bale storage system. The idea is you would go straight from your hay field, move your hay directly to this structure and place it in here. Do any kind of prep you want to do as far as peeling off strings or net wrap or whatever, cover it up with a tarp. Ideally, you would have a roof over this structure. Then this becomes your storage structure, but it also becomes a self-feeder. As you have these roll bales in here, the cattle come up on this approach. They stand on a hardened pad, which is actually concrete. They stick their heads through these head gates to basically get to the hay. The hay is about 22 inches behind them because what we want the cattle to do is reach their head in and stretch, which cuts down on the amount of waste that's going to be on the outside. As you can see, after this winter feeding season, there's very little in the form of wasted hay on the outside. But as these cattle stick their head through and they eat, as they eat these roll bales, basically it glides back. And I'm not touching this. This is basically just moving based on the wind that we've got going on right now. But it's easy to move. Cattle have a lot of pressure that they can put on a structure, but basically they just eat. If you wanted to limit feed them, we have locks that are designed on this structure to lock it down. And if you want them to clean up a certain volume of hay, say 4 linear feet, before you moved on, there it is. It's actually designed, or it has enough room for 10 head to get in here and eat at one time. But that's not how many can actually use this. When you have feed that's here, free choice, as in this case, you can have groups of cattle coming up here to eat out of the structure. From an engineering perspective, normally we would take that 10 head capacity that we would have here and multiply it by 2.5 or 3. So technically this is actually designed for 30 head. If you needed something bigger, then you could have something else. But this is all about just design and imagination as far as accommodating however many head you want to do. So they would eat this, and then basically they would push this back. Once this rack gets back to the far side, depending on how many cattle you have and how much you need to feed, you would back drag any of this wasted hay and slop, create a stockpile out here in the field. And we're up on a summit position, so it can drain and it can dry out. And then you can actually remove that wasted hay and manure in the spring, say around April, and then land apply it to utilize the nutrients and the organic matter that's in there. But after you back drag this out, you would bring the feeder back if you needed more hay, and you would basically reload the magazine, and you would do all of that from what we call a compound or your area that we've established on this back side. Ideally, what I like to have is I like to have a water source within 150 or further than 150 feet away from a feeding source to create different stations, and also not to have wasted hay in the dropped off in the water. So if you take their normal path from right here around to a tire water that we have on the back side, they're walking 150 feet. So we've met that requirement. If you're going to utilize this structure, you need to have good hay. I mean, that's just a rule, and that's the whole purpose of conserving hay and harvesting it anyway, so you can feed it at a later time. So you need to harvest good hay. In order to keep that hay conserved, it needs to be covered. If you got a lot of stems and nastiness, thistles and stuff like that, you might have some balling up in here, which would require you to do some cleaning out in order for them to push it down and continue this self-feeding. Everything, pretty much, I mean, these are store-bought feed panels, but everything else as far as the rails and the structure that we've got it mounted on is all 2-inch tubular steel. So essentially what this black frame does is it's a top running bridge crane is what it is, like you would see in a large factory. And again, this is a material handling type of thing, and cranes are used, I mean, they're the workhorses in manufacturing plants. So we just taken this design of a crane and put it in here to basically hold the feed panels so that they can actually access this material and self-feed themselves. And that's what you want. You want your storage to be your feeding, you want your feeding to be self-feeding. So now we're on the inside of the feeding structure. So normally this would be where the hay is. The cattle would be on the other side. They stick their heads through. Again, we've got this space to make them stretch. We also want to get their head in a grazing position. If you get a cow's head in a grazing position, get it down, she actually creates more slava, which makes the rumen that much more efficient. You're looking at least a 10% increase in efficiency just by getting her head down. The other thing we wanted to do is basically clean up this hay on the bottom. The hay storage, I mean, we've tried both things as far as putting in roll bales on their end. We left them on their sides like they normally would be. Personally, I like them being on the end. I think it makes it easier for the animals to cleave off the hay, which is what you want them to do. You want them to eat. But some producers might think, no, I want them to fight for it and take it off the end. but we have this gap that's created to basically reduce that waste from pulling off the end. It makes it more loose, makes it easier for them to eat. On the rollers, again, this is all 2-inch tubular steel, so this is the rail that the crane is riding on, and then we've established basically this lock right here that's using essentially thumb screws. And so what we can do is we want to limit feed them, we can move these locks down the rail, or we can lock it in if we needed to work on it or whatnot, so that we're not getting trapped in here. Okay, so on the bottom of these store-bought feeders, we actually put some galvanized steel sheet metal along the bottom and use self-tapping screws to attach that. The idea behind that is again, to reduce the waste that might get pulled out or pushed out from them eating. So again, that's something else that we put on there. We've got U-bolts, basically to hold this, these cattle panels on here, these feed panels on to the crane. And so we've got those on there. And the idea of that was basically if we wanted to adjust these panels to reduce the amount of waste or increase the amount of ease of pushing this structure, that gave us the flexibility of doing that. Again, the floor pitches to the left and the right. We've got approximately a 2% slope on it to get the drainage to go out the sides, so we're not compromising the integrity of the hay and losing nutrient value. What you really want to have is you want to have these panels kicked away from the cattle about 15 or 20 degrees on the upper side. And then what that does is that allows that cow to actually get her head in that grazing position, and also reduces the pressure that she's going to apply to this frame with her shoulders. So it just makes it easier for them to eat, makes it easier for them to clean up the stuff on the bottom. So if we redid this, you know, we might want to kick this away. If we took these roll bales and we set them on their end, which we did in some cases, depending on the size of the roll bale, in this case it would give us about a 6-foot height. That is also the limit as far as how high a cow wants to graze, or as far as how high she wants to eat. I would not recommend putting in roll bales on top of these other roll bales, because if they ate out the bottoms, you know, you could have a roll bale coming across, you could suffocate an animal, you could break a neck, that kind of thing, which is unacceptable. So the design is put these roll bales in here, or square bales, or whatever size hay that you're feeding, up to that 6-foot height, and then call it done. Okay, so here's your feeder, and here's your compound area. Okay, so this is where you would be, and what this design means is you don't have to get in with the cattle, okay? So with this structure right here, one of the things you might need to do is access the side rails of this crane. So what we've installed right here is essentially man gates or stiles, and so you can open this up, and we got this excess concrete right here, which is all planned. So basically you could walk down this way, you could check anything on the rail, see how the structure's moving, and again, it doesn't require you to open up a large gate and get in with the cattle and have the gate flying open and that kind of thing. And then when you're done, you just basically close the man gate up. If you don't want to use a gate like this, you could basically have a stile or an escape, if you will. One of the things that I liked about this structure is, I mean, we can show you later as far as in the film, is basically what the cattle did as far as their approach to get up on the structure, as far as how much pugging they did in the soils. Conversely, we did do some ring feeding in the same field, so you can also see what the tractor tire did in this area as well. And so again, so this is your area. Another thing that we did is we got a water that's set over here, that's a tire water that's serving this field for the winter feeding, but it's also serving that lane and that other area that's over there. So I think this has been a nice addition to the Eden Shale farm. I expect that what's going to happen come June or whenever, when they harvest hay out of the hay fields, that basically they'll bring that hay up to this particular structure, stage it, and that's it. They're just going to move it one time after they bring it out of the field, and they don't have to move it anymore, and the cow will basically self-feed it. So I think it's been a nice addition. I expect them to use this come June. We'll cover it up, and then basically it'll be sitting there ready for them to winter feed out of this particular structure. If you're interested in more about this structure or any other structures, just go to the Eden Shale Farm website, edenshalfarm.com, and you should see all the kind of resources and any kind of information that you need to see as far as this structure or any other winter feeding structures that we're using on this farm.